Hello and welcome to the Bible Matters podcast. I'm Molly Piper, and in today's episode we interviewed William Taylor, Senior Pastor at St Helens Bishopsgate. We talked to William about the second half of John's Gospel, particularly on chapters 11 and 12 and 18 to 20. And we spoke about the cross, Jesus' teaching on the cross, and the narrative of the cross. And William gave us some really helpful tips on how to go about teaching that section. This is the Bible Matters podcast, encouraging you in faithful Bible teaching and ministry.
William Taylor, it's a great pleasure, as always, to have you on the Bible Matters podcast. Welcome back.
Well, it's delightful to be here again.
It's been a while since we spoke to you. Have you been keeping well? Still going as a Christian?
Still going as a Christian.
That's
still preaching the gospel.
Good.
Still reading the Bible, still saying my prayers.
I'm not too sure what we'd have done if you'd have said no to that question, but it would have been quite a podcast indeed. But you are here today to carry on our studies in the book of John. We've been with Gwilym Davis, who's taken us through chapters 1 to 10, which has been utterly enlightening for me. It's been truly tremendous, absolutely fantastic. So no pressure at all. But you are going to be guiding us through the second half of the book from chapters 11 to 21.
For sure.
I'd love to start by asking, and I'm really in your hands here, just in terms of those chapters 11 to 21, where would you begin in terms of kind of splitting it up and suggesting a good place to start? Where would you like to start?
Well, chapter 11 is quite a good place to start, I'd say.
It makes
Now,
sense.
I think it studies in John's Gospel, it's just very interesting to know where we've been.
Okay.
So for us here at St Helens, back in the 1990s, mid-1990s, we decided it was time to change from studying Mark as an annual basic discipleship text.
Yeah.
And we were asked to begin to look at John's Gospel. And looking around, I mean, Mark, I think, in terms of gospel studies, because of the studies we've been doing for year after year after year, we had a good sense of how the whole thing held together. But looking around with John's Gospel, there was very, very little to help us in terms of it in the hands of the preacher to enable you to get your handle on the gospel as a whole. And so it was thrilling for us. Actually, I remember spending the entire summer between jobs rooted in John's Gospel for like 3-4 months. And then the first year was a wonderful sort of journey of discovery. Don Carson had recently produced his commentary.
Yeah.
That was enormously helpful, and really, I think, the most helpful thing to us. The big revelation, I think, to me, was up to that stage, I think you would have been hard pushed to find anybody who didn't say that John is basically a book of signs and a book of life. Now, I've done a bit of thinking about that more recently, and I had always thought that came from Rudolf Bultmann, who was a scholar who we wouldn't necessarily follow in all his theology.
Sure.
But actually it tracks back, way back before Bultmann, to the 1920s. And I'm sure somebody on the podcast will be able to, listening to the podcast, will say, well, I can trace it back even further than that.
Yeah.
But there was a guy called Faure, I don't know how you pronounce his name, but who argued that you had the Wunderbuch, the Book of Signs, and it all of that thinking. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but it seems to me it comes out of the sort of way of doing biblical studies that says, oh, there must have been a source before the book was actually put together.
Sure. Okay.
And so what they posit is a book of signs with what they used to say were the 7, and it ran from chapter 1 through to the end of chapter 12 and the end of Jesus' public ministry.
So a different division to what we've got now today.
And as we began to study, and I think the initiator of our thinking was Don Carson, because he stressed the importance of the signs, and particularly of chapters 2 through 4. This is the first sign he did in Cana. This is the second sign he did in Cana.
Yeah.
But then we began to say to ourselves, hold on a second. Can you take those sign divisions further? And is the idea that there was this sign source and Wunderbuch, as Faure puts it, or Bultmann, the science, or whatever, is that actually right?
Yeah.
And is it right to make the division at the end of chapter 12, and then on into chapter 13? I know his public ministry finishes at the end of chapter 12. But there's strong continuity between chapter 11 and chapter 12, and strong continuity between chapter 12 and chapter 13. You just go through it and have a look at the mentions of the getting closer and closer and closer to the Passover. And at the end of chapter 11, is it around about verse 54, we're hearing that the Passover is upon us. And then chapter 12, same again. And then chapter 13, now it's just before the Passover. So the thing which I think really swung it for me was that at the end of chapter 10, I think it's worth looking at this. At the end of chapter 10, verse 40, Jesus went away again across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing at first, and there he remained. And many came to him, and they said, John did no sign, but everything that John said about this man was true. And many believed in him there. Now, what was the job of John the Baptist? Chapter 1, verse 4, 5, 6. Chapter 1, verse 6, 7. John the Baptist's job was to get us to believe in Jesus. And it seems to me the end of the first half of John's Gospel sees John the Baptist's job complete. Jesus went back to where it all began. John the Baptist has done his job. And then you get the resurrection of Lazarus. Now, once you begin to say, okay, well, what does the resurrection of Lazarus, if you've got 2 to 4 pairing, and you've got 5 to 10, 9 and 10 pairing, what might the resurrection of Lazarus pair with? Well, there is a sign, which, funnily enough, those who believe in the book of signs don't have in the book of signs.
In there 7,
the resurrection of Jesus himself in chapter 20.
Yeah.
And so you then begin to say, hang on, the resurrection of Lazarus, the resurrection of Jesus. What is chapter 12, the end of chapter 11, from verse 45 through to the end of chapter 12? What's it all about? When you look at the content, it's all about the death of Jesus.
Yeah.
So what's chapter 18 and 19 about in John's Gospel?
Well, Jesus going to his death.
It's all about the death of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so we began to say to ourselves, well, hold on a second. It seems to us that the first half of the book has got sign, 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 sign. The second half of the book kicks off, if we're right, first half ends end of chapter 10. Second half kicks off with the resurrection of Lazarus, paired with
the resurrection of Jesus.
Now that makes sense of John's purpose. John says, chapter 20, verse 30, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples. He understands the resurrection to be a key sign.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So actually, my suggestion would be you can read about the history of the sign source theory in an interesting. I mean,
some might find it interesting.
It's only 56 pages.
Okay.
The sign source in the fourth gospel, a critical evaluation of the semia hypothesis in recent research, 1994 to 2013, by Gilbert van Belle. I think he might be Belgian, but is he French? But he'll take
somewhere in Europe.
He'll take you back through Bultmann, through Faure, or however he says his name, and but. Actually, if John understands the resurrection to be a key sign, you can't not include it in your book of signs. The whole thing is a book of signs.
Sure.
And you go, resurrection of Lazarus, resurrection of Jesus, the cross, the end of chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 18 and 19, the cross. And then the conclusion in chapter 21 to match what I would call the prologue. Personally, I would hold the whole of chapter 1 as the prologue of John's Gospel, and the conclusion in chapter 21 pulling all the threads together.
Yeah. Okay.
I
So
hope.
beautiful structure to the gospel.
I think and then you've got this piece in the middle, which I think we're going to look at next week,
Mm.
13 through 17. Okay, life through the death of Jesus, 11, 12, 18, 19, 20, life through the death of Jesus. But 13 through 17, what does that look like now? What does it mean to have life today with the physical absence of Jesus?
Yeah.
But
okay.
that's for next week.
For next week. If then these two signs are bracketing this section, as we begin in chapter 11, perhaps chapter 12 too, what are we supposed to be learning, which is going to guide us through this section?
Well, I would take chapter 20, verse 30, Jesus and many other signs. These are written for us so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that by believing you might have life in his name. Now, I think that gives us three key themes that run all through the gospel.
Yeah.
So, who is Jesus? That Jesus is the Christ. And so we're going to be learning, what does it mean for Jesus to be the Christ? I am the resurrection and the life.
Okay.
I mean, boom.
Yeah.
It is, Martha, you believe, you're a good Old Testament girl. You believe in the resurrection at the end of time. I know he will rise on the last day.
Yeah.
I am the resurrection. What does it mean for Jesus to in him was life? Remember chapter 1? In him was life, and that life was the light of the world. In him was resurrection, life. I am the resurrection and the life. So what does it mean for him to be the Christ? That he is the resurrection.
Yep.
Not just that he rose and I will rise, but that he is the resurrection. I mean, it's an extraordinary... I happen to believe there are multiple I am sayings in John's Gospel. I know that's a bit radical, but I think there are far more than 7.
Okay.
And
okay.
I am the resurrection and the life, obviously, is one of the multiple I am sayings. And for him to say, I am everybody coming from their grave to judgment.
Yeah.
You remember when Jesus says in chapter 5, God has entrusted all judgment to the Son. And in chapter 5, when he says, they will hear his voice and the dead will come out of their tombs. I am the resurrection. But then, so he's the Christ, he's the resurrection Christ. But also, he's the Christ who goes to the cross. This is how the Father's glory is seen, chapter 12, I will glorify my name through the death of my son. So,
do you aspire to be an Old Testament girl as well?
Absolutely. There's nothing I want more.
I hope you're a New Testament girl, Molly.
Love them both. Both of them.
I'd love to ask you just a bit more about chapter 12, because I think it's quite a strange chapter in some ways, an interesting one, maybe a little bit of a difficult one to preach. I guess one of the reasons why some might be convinced it is part of a different section if you break John differently is because it does seem to have these very kind of grand displays in it. Jesus sort of crying out, God speaking from heaven. It does kind of seem climactic. Do you have any thoughts on how John is using those techniques and those ideas?
Well, I think what chapter 12 is doing is giving us a lot of the theology of the cross. So that when you get to the narrative of chapter 18 and 19, yes, there is some theology of the cross coming through things like the Passover theme, it is finished, to fulfill Scripture. So you get some of the theology of the cross there. But I think chapter 11 and 12 contain a large amount of the theology of what's going on the cross. So, for example, I think this piece runs from 11:45 to the end of 12.
Okay.
For example, you have Caiaphas, the high priest, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it's better for you that one man should die on behalf of the people, not that the whole nation should perish. He didn't say this of his own accord, but high priest, he prophesied that Jesus would die on behalf of the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather in to one the children of God who are scattered abroad. Now there you haven't got that in 18 and 19.
Yeah, okay.
There you've got the cross being explained. So I think it's true of all the Gospels. By the time you get to the narrative at the close of the Gospel, you have to remember to bring all the theological freight that you have gathered up to that point in the rest of the Gospel to bear. And a lot of the, if you like, the theological freight for explaining the Gospel is found in chapter 11, verse 45 through to chapter 12. I mean, how else would we be able to explain the unbelief of the Jews of the cross if we hadn't been given by John 12 verse 36 through to 43? So that's there to explain why some people don't believe the cross. The glory of the cross, 12:27 through 36. That's what is all that doing? It's doing, the crowd said that it had thundered, others said an angel had spoken. Jesus answered, verse 30, "This voice has come for your sake, not mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of the world be cast out." We're having explained for us and what is actually happening at the cross theologically.
Yeah.
I think that's what chapter 12 is doing.
So if you were to jump into, I suppose, the passion narrative at the end of John, having ignored the rest of it, a lot of it's going to remain a bit opaque, but actually the explanatory power is in these chapters.
Yes. I mean, I'm not at all against doing that.
Sure.
And I think actually chapter 18, 19, it's a great kind of lead up to Easter if you happen to follow those sort of patterns in the church you serve.
Of course.
But if you're going to do that, you've got to remember to be bringing in everything you've been learning earlier on. And again, I think 20 through 26, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus. The nations are now coming and they want to see Jesus. And Jesus, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Well, here you've got global mission.
Yeah.
What's the cross about? Actually, it's about the Son of Man falling into the ground and dying, as Caiaphas says, kind of unwittingly, on behalf of the nations.
Yeah.
And this message now is going to go to the nations as disciples themselves, following the footsteps of Jesus, and die taking it to the nations. So I think I've said it, but chapter 11:45 through to the end of chapter 12 is key. And you've got this just beautiful piece with Mary anointing Jesus.
What is your understanding of what's actually going on there?
Well, I think it's the beauty, isn't it? I mean, the beauty of what's going on. I mean, what's your understanding?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I guess I was looking at it this morning. I think it is a real surprise, isn't it, when Jesus says, "Leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial."
Yes.
And I think you're right. It's this beautiful scene, but Jesus, in a real almost sucker punch, brings his death and puts it there at the forefront.
And also that we've had the resurrection. I mean, this ties Lazarus tightly to chapter 12. And again, yes, the two chapters just hang so tight together.
Yeah.
Because Mary, you would imagine, I don't know what you think, Molly, but you would imagine that Mary is coming out of gratitude for what Jesus has done for her brother. Jesus says, "What I've done for your brother is really enabled made possible through the day of my burial." And so there you've got his death and resurrection tied tightly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think once you've got chapter 12 so tightly tied to chapter 11, and it is, you can't deny that, then chapter 13, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew his hour had come to depart from this world, is so tightly tied to chapter 12 that I'm afraid I think the Book of Signs theory starts to really fall apart. Not least the fact it hasn't included the miraculous catch of fish at the end as another sign.
And that's certainly true.
Mm.
So I guess in summary, approaching this section 11 to 21, really the most helpful thing is to understand this is a discrete section. It's got these bookended signs, and there are these very key themes of, well, obviously Jesus' identity, belief and life, but particularly Jesus' death, which are going to steer.
Jesus' death, which makes possible the resurrection, that I am the resurrection. Yeah, I think that's right. That's exactly right.
William, we've been talking about chapters 11 and 12, how they
Yes.
set up this section, how they give us, I suppose, an agenda in some respects for what we're going to be thinking about. Can you just explain to me why you think it is a good idea to leapfrog chapters 13 to 17 and jump into chapters 18 today?
Well, I don't.
Okay.
But
I put words in your mouth there. I apologise.
Yeah, I think you said we're doing 13 to 17 next week and
Okay.
11 and 12 and 18 and 19 this week, so I'm doing as I'm told.
Okay.
Why do you think it's a good idea?
Well,
Maybe it was it your idea, Molly?
It was all me. I am the mastermind behind.
You are, yes.
I believe I have an email. No, I won't go into it. But I suppose you commented actually when we talked about our overview of John that 13 to 17 itself does seem to be, again, a sort of discrete section in a number of ways. It's kind of
Within the section.
within a section. It's kind of geographically located together.
Yes.
There's this kind of theme tying it together of Jesus going away.
So 11 and 12, narrative. 13 through 17, I mean, notwithstanding the kind of enacted parable of the foot washing, is basically doctrine, discourse, upper room. It all happens there. It's with his disciples, particularly after Judas has gone out, and it's got this specific theme of what it means to have life in Jesus' name when he's gone. And actually, you could move from the end of chapter 12 through to the start of chapter 18 without missing a beat.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's why I thought actually it's helpful, and I think that probably you're right. I'm sure it probably was my. I've just been on holiday, so everything before that has been erased. But I think it is helpful to look at it together, but I wouldn't necessarily preach it like that. I think
Okay.
that's
Yeah. Sure.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Sure. So we want to respect John did put it in this order. We're
We
not
do.
suggesting that he got it wrong, but actually,
I mean, really interesting. I brought with me this commentary, which, again, is a guy who we wouldn't necessarily, want to follow in a lot of what he says. But this is C.H. Dodd, and the commentary dates from, if I can find it, the 1960s, I think.
okay.
First published 1953.
Wowee.
Now,
okay.
this gives you a sense of the sort of thing that was going on in biblical scholarship, so-called, in the mid-20th century. He says, and I think this is considered to be quite radical, I conceive it to be the duty of an interpreter at least to see what can be done with the document as it has come down to us before attempting to improve on it. The present order is not fortuitous, but deliberately devised by somebody, even if he were only a scribe doing his best, and that the person in question, whether the author or somebody else, had some design in mind and was not necessarily irresponsible or unintelligent.
Okay. So he's basically saying that this has been ordered purposefully.
And we should therefore follow the author's purpose,
Yeah.
both in what he's wanting to communicate and the application that he is, or the transformative purpose, I think is the trendy way of saying it in our circles these days. But, we should be actually following the author. Now, he happens to follow Bultmann and Fauré and all these other guys think actually the author probably wasn't John.
Okay.
But
nonetheless, he makes a good point.
yeah, he does that. And then you think, actually, well, T.H. Dodd, there's so many things that I wouldn't want to agree with him on, but he's trying to do what we're trying to do.
Well, let's pick up in chapter 18 then. So the story continues pretty much like you said, without missing a beat from chapter 12, and we are in the crucifixion narrative. Can you just give us a sense of these chapters leading up to Jesus' death and resurrection? What is John trying to teach us about Jesus' death and resurrection as we come across it here?
Well, I think most importantly, that his death is fundamental to his messiahship, that he is the Christ, the Son of God. You just the very famous, after this, Jesus, knowing that all was now completed, finished, said, to fulfill the scriptures, I thirst. A jar full of sour wine stood there. They put it on a sponge, on a hyssop branch, held it to his mouth. When Jesus received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished. It is completed." He bowed his head. And so all the way through, you can see that John is wanting to teach us the identity of Christ. I mean, then, the very next piece, verse 31 through 37 of chapter 19, these things took place that the scripture might be fulfilled, not one of his bones will be broken. So he is the Christ. And even up front in verses 12 through 14, you can see the unwitting prophecy of Caiaphas drawn upon again. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die on behalf of the people. So all the way through, I think he's wanting to show us the death of Jesus. It's absolutely part of God's purpose and plan. Identity, identity, identity.
Yeah. One
major theme, but at the same time, the nature of humanity and the need for life. You think of chapter 3. Light has come into the world, and men hated the light because their deeds were evil.
Yeah.
And you've got kind of all of humanity represented by the soldiers, by Pilate, the world. But at the same time, you've got the Jews and their failure.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're looking for anything new other than what we've already got in the major three themes of the gospel.
Yeah.
Who is the Christ? He's the Christ, the Son of God. What is humanity? Life. Why do we need life? Peter has no life. He needs Jesus to die for him. And humanity needs life because humanity is essentially wicked and evil. And that came out so strongly in the first half of the gospel. So I think, and then faith, what does true faith actually look like?
And it's really impactful, I think. We looked at this at the youth group last year, and actually seeing Jesus side by side with Peter's failure, it's just so striking that he knew exactly what humanity was like when he chose to go to the cross.
And the Jews as well. I was struck again by chapter 19, verse 15 this morning. We have no king but Caesar. Just extraordinary, isn't it?
The irony is remarkable. Picking up on your point, Molly, it's such a good point. In all the passion narratives, what one sees the courage. Jesus just stands so tall. In the face of the wickedness and failure. What is truth? I mean, Pilate is, what is truth, said Pilate, and walked away. That's some famous...
Francis Bacon, is it?
That's absolutely right. Good on. Talk to us about Francis Bacon.
No, that's all I got.
Not the artist.
Great surname, and that's all I've got.
I think he was Chancellor. Or something like that. Was it, what date? 16th century?
I don't know.
I met a bloke, and during COVID, we were both walking to the shops, and he's a real kind of literary wizzo. And he he puts on plays and all the rest of it. And he said, "Oh, now what are you speaking on in your church, young man?" I was 57 or something, and so anyway, there we are. So that gives you a sense of him. And I said, "Oh, I'm about to go and speak on Pilate and his hopeless failure." And he said, "Aha, yes, what is truth?" said Pilate, and walked away. And I had to rush home and swat it up and find out who said it and all the rest of it.
I'd love to be that kind of person who just has a Shakespeare quote for every scenario.
Yes, even if it's Francis Bacon.
Or Francis Bacon, indeed.
That's right.
Just to pick up on, I guess, what you said a few moments ago, that his death is integral to being the Christ, because that's quite a sharp comment to say in respect to he's not the Christ without dying in this way. Is that the point you're making?
Yeah, it absolutely is.
So it's not that he is the Christ and he just happens to have been captured and crucified, but actually this whole element of his life, i.e. his death, was actually the thing which confirmed him to be the Messiah.
Absolutely so. And I think you get that in chapter 11:45 through 12, and then you get it again at the cross with the fulfillment of Scripture, that the Scripture might be fulfilled. It is finished. And that piece is so strong because the same word or the same word root comes, is it 3 times just in those 2 verses, 28 through 30. But also, and I think this is essential to our theology of the cross, not only do we have our theology of the cross and the atonement from chapter 11:45 through 12, but we also have our theology of the atonement from the Old Testament scriptures that are now being fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I would love us to see more kind of, if you like, inverted commas, doctrines of the cross done through straight expositional work in the passion narratives.
Okay.
And in this passion narrative, the Passover is so strong. The Day of Atonement is incredibly strong. I think it's there in the background in the foot washing, and it runs through the piece. And obviously Isaiah 53 as well. And obviously in some of the passion narratives, Genesis 22 and
Isaac being sacrificed.
Isaac being sacrificed, and Mount Moriah, and the place of the temple.
Yeah.
All of that comes together. So if you do your exposition right, with biblical theology in mind, and with the whole freight of theology from the rest of the gospel and indeed the rest of the Bible, you will find yourself with a proper doctrine of the cross as you expound and study the passion narratives. In fact, I think that's the best way to do your doctrine of the cross.
Yeah. I guess it's always true that the Old Testament deepens our understanding of the New Testament, but particularly here you're saying, actually.
Yes, I think I would say the Old Testament enables our understanding.
Okay, so it can't be done if you...
I don't think it can be done properly, and that's where people, have failed so badly in their understanding of the cross, because you can't understand the cross apart from a theology of the Day of Atonement, and the Day of Atonement is about propitiation.
Yeah.
And you can't understand the cross without, if you're going to take John and treat John's material with integrity, you can't understand the cross without a right understanding of what the Passover is about. And the Passover is about the wrath of God passing over as a result of a sacrificial victim.
Yeah.
What is that if it's not propitiation?
Of course.
Redemption flowing from it.
Yeah.
So it's all there if we've read our Bibles, and if we hold the Bible together and we expound the passion narrative properly.
In some respects, discourse around the crucifixion has become more liberal, perhaps in the past 100 years. But actually, if you kind of read it as John wants you to read it, with the backlog of Old Testament knowledge in your mind, it just becomes increasingly difficult, I think, to actually have a liberal view of the cross where substitutionary atonement isn't front and centre.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. I mean, Leon Morris, in his Apostolic Preaching of the Cross, is very, very clear on that.
Okay.
But actually, you don't. I mean, Leon Morris was hugely helpful in his explanation of what dawn means and what it means in Leviticus 16 and 17. But you, in a sense, you wouldn't say you don't need Leon Morris to read your Bible.
Yeah.
And yeah, you simply cannot have the cross without propitiatory sacrifice if you've read. If you're reading your Bible properly.
Yeah, and if you're reading it as John would have you read it.
With integrity, which is actually, interestingly...
that's C.H. Dodd.
What C.H. Dodd is saying he's wanting to do, but he has a problem with God's wrath. Yeah.
Well, there we go. I think you had a couple of other comments to make about the trial.
Well, I just think the trial is the trial is so important because it helps us to understand the kingdom. When you come to teach the trial, the choreography, I think, is key. So you have... did you pick this up, Molly, when you were doing this with the youth group?
Yeah, I think we had little figurines who we set up on the table and had them moving around for all of the different scenery.
Oh, that's absolutely great. So
when you said figurines, what were they figurines of?
They were idolatrous figurines of the Lord Jesus, were they?
I wouldn't possibly ever do such a thing. I think they were probably stick figures of other people.
Other people, yeah. Okay, fair enough. But that's really very, very helpful because, they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. He goes in. Verse 29, Pilate went outside. Verse 23, Pilate entered his headquarters. And then verse 38, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went back outside. And then chapter 19, verse 1, Pilate took Jesus and flogged him inside. And then verse 4, Pilate went out again. So you go outside, inside, outside, inside, outside. Right at the centre of the piece, I think, is I find no guilt in him. I find no guilt in him. Behold the man. But on the kind of external part of the inside, outside, at either end, you have Pilate and the Jews, and you're having this, what people would call Johannine irony, just you're being shown the Jews, as you mentioned earlier, we have no king but Caesar, the pure hypocrisy. So you have that. But then you have next layer in, as it were, the nature of Jesus's kingdom.
Okay.
And so when Pilate is, what is truth, said Pilate, and walked away. When Pilate is interrogating Jesus in 33 through 38 of chapter 18, absolutely key, verse 36, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from the world." So you are a king. Yes, I am a king. I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Anybody on the side of truth listens to me. That, you remember chapter 6? Was it about verse 15 of chapter 6? When they sought to make him king by force.
Yes.
We all want, we want
Yeah.
Christendom. We want Christian England. We're a Christian nation. No, we never have been.
And Christian Ireland as well.
Oh, and I'm so sorry. Yes,
Thank
of
you,
course.
thank you.
And Christian United Kingdom.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
right.
forth. Yeah, absolutely. So, we want Christendom. We're not Islamic. We're not looking to build a caliphate.
Yeah.
My kingdom is not of this world. We're not fighting. So, we need to be very, very clear on that because that distinguishes Jesus from the Holy Roman Empire. It distinguishes Jesus for those who want to have, Christian Britain.
Yeah.
And it distinguishes Jesus from any other territorial belief. So that's kind of one side of the piece. And then on the other side of the piece, we have Jesus interrogated again in verse 8 of chapter 19. Pilate heard this statement. He was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters. "Where are you from?" Jesus gave no answer. "You would have no authority at all unless it had been given you from above."
we can't, of course, ignore chapter 20,
Yeah.
the resurrection.
Yes.
And I suppose in some ways the climax to the gospel. This is pretty much where John is choosing to end the narrative. What kind of things are we supposed to be understanding about the resurrection as we jump into chapter 20?
Well, I think obviously that it happened.
Okay, yeah. He really came back to life.
He really did. And this is real eyewitness testimony. And what I'm about to say can be used in such a way that we end up then downplaying the real eyewitness evidence.
Okay.
But I think John is almost saying to us, you kind of don't actually need to have seen it.
Okay.
Because if faith, chapter 2, verse 22, if biblical faith is about believing the scriptures, the word of Jesus, and the witness of the apostles, we don't need to have seen it.
Okay.
And I think chapter 20 has within it rebuke for failure to trust the scriptures, the Old Testament, and rebuke for failure to trust the apostles' word.
Okay, so I guess famously Thomas is the one who's rebuked.
Yeah, and so our classic sort of Easter Sunday morning talk is, look, it really happened. Thomas went back and Jesus came and he put his hands there and he put his fingers there and so forth. That's not really the point of Thomas. Now, again, when you hear that, don't underplay or discount the reality that Thomas actually had to do that.
Of course, yeah.
And I think we make a mistake when we sort of think, biblical faith is about trusting the word and the word of the apostles. We then just teach that and we ignore the fact Thomas actually did. He was doubting Thomas and he put his finger and then he believed. So, but if you think about the verse that I think is most intriguing is chapter 20, verse 9. So take it from verse 8. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in. He saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scriptures. Why? Why does... when we were working on this in the 1990s, over and over again, I never, ever understood. I think where I am now is, as yet they didn't understand the scriptures, that he must rise from the dead. In a sense, they didn't need to go into the tomb. The stone had been rolled away. They had the scriptures. They should have immediately, because from the scriptures. As yet they did not understand from the scriptures that he must rise from the dead. And so they went in and they looked. And that persuaded them the scriptures were so. But you didn't actually need to go in and look.
Yeah, okay.
So in a sense, all this stuff on the empty tomb is key. Of course, it's vital. It's absolutely right and true that, you make the big thing about the empty tomb. Yeah, absolutely. But biblical faith is trusting the word of God in the Old Testament scriptures, Jesus' own word, and the witness of the apostles. And Thomas failed to trust the witness of the apostles and Jesus' own word and the Old Testament scripture. So actually he's getting a solid rebuke.
Okay. Because I think I get what you're saying. So you're saying you might be tempted, and I think I've done this in the past, to say Thomas is, he's an evidence guy. We're all evidence people, but hey, look, there is evidence for Jesus. Thomas saw it. Isn't that great?
That's all of your Sunday talk.
And there is truth to that. But actually, John's point is that Thomas had everything we have, in that he had the apostolic words, the empty tomb, and the scriptures, and yet he didn't believe.
Well, he had the words of Jesus.
The words of Jesus,
and the Old Testament scriptures, and yet he didn't believe. But then when you come to see that, you can end up teaching Thomas as you numpty, you shouldn't, and you forget the fact that he actually did. He did see it. And we can then downplay the evidence, and both are there.
I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? Because, and people have said this as very much like, I guess, a criticism, but the details of the resurrection are fairly few, really, in John's gospel. But if what you're saying, which is what John is saying, is right, actually we already know everything we need to know about the resurrection already in John's gospel and the rest of the Bible. So why would there need to be more chapters about it?
You've had Lazarus, you've got Isaiah 26, you got Psalm 16. You know, Martha was expecting the resurrection from the dead.
Yeah.
You know, she was a good Old Testament woman. You know, it's all there.
Yeah.
William, it would be great to hear a bit about how we might teach these chapters. Can you tell us a bit about how you've done that in the past, how you've tackled it, what kind of series you've done?
Well, all sorts of different things. I mean, I think evangelistic, you know, I remember doing a series of evangelistic talks on John 11. I think we called it something like Dead Man Walking or something like that. But there are such great themes in John 11 as well. I mean, the fact that Jesus deliberately waits so that Lazarus is unquestionably dead. That is, I think that warrants almost like a whole Sunday in the early setup of that chapter. And pastorally, it then moves through, once we've applied it to seeing the glory of God, to the, and I don't think it's illegitimate to take it in this direction, you know, to God's timing in some of the things we face with all their traumas that are used by him actually to open our eyes, to enable us to see things which he might never otherwise have seen. So I think I would have a good chunk on the early, but then when you get to verse 16 of chapter 11, you need 17 through 27. Surely you want a whole talk on I am the resurrection and the life. And really worth spending a lot of time unpicking I am the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. What does that mean? What is it talking about? Spiritual life in him now that continues right through death to eternity. And what is talking about physical death now that is reversed on his return because he is the resurrection and the life. So I think a whole week on that. I would then want, again, 28 through 37, this extraordinary piece where Jesus weeps and the emotions that he expresses, and in a sense his divinity, his humanity. And of course that is just of such comfort and encouragement to so many people in a congregation and to ourselves as we teach it. And then the resurrection of Lazarus. Come out. Just a word. I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. Boom. You know, this is, you know, and I know it's a often said thing, but, you know, he had to say, Lazarus, come out, because on the last day, when he says come out, they will all come out. So I think chapter 11, you would have probably 4 talks like that. Chapter 12, again, I think the divisions you find in most of the text, but I would go from 11:45 through to 53, or maybe to the end of the chapter, probably 11:45 to the end of the chapter, because there you're dealing with the theology of substitution, one man dying on behalf of, and explaining the cross. Then you've got, you know, the beauty of the anointing of Jesus, what we were talking about earlier, and then the triumphal entry. What kind of king is he? Well, we always knew it was going to be this kind of king. And then for the nations, so we would see Jesus. And this, again, this other remarkable I am saying that you've got when the Son of Man being lifted up, when he's lifted up on the cross, then he will draw all men to himself, and that we will know I am is there. So, and then an explanation of unbelief. So you've got 4 or 5 talks there in 11:45 through to, but it's a great little mini series on the cross. And the world, I think I missed out the Greeks seeing Jesus, and a grain of wheat falling into the ground, that the cross must happen if global mission is to take place. So I think that's the sort of thing I'll be doing.
And when you're thinking about teaching a series like that, it's coming up, can you tell us a bit about what your preparation would look like in the weeks or months leading up to it?
Yeah, I mean, I need to make sure that I don't just sort of churn out stuff that that it's real. It's real for me. And so I do try to make sure that I'm, if it's something I've never worked on before, like, recently we were teaching Hosea, for example, I might be reading it and rereading it, months and months in advance, because I'm preaching sometimes 3-4 times a week. If I'm doing a series like this, I'll be wanting to make sure that I get right back into it and have time and space to be able to see new things and to learn new things. I think that's really important. We don't just want to be churning stuff over and over again. I might write out the text. Certainly I'll print it out. I always do that, print the text out on one side of a page. I think I've talked about that before here, but I always want to do that. And then I will be, reading it, rereading it. And giving it plenty of time long in advance. I always think time spent well in advance is worth, 4 or 5 times the amount of time spent the week before.
And do you find, I guess, the cross, and I don't want to sound derogatory here or whatever, but the cross is so well known, it is perhaps easy to scoot over the verses. Do you try particularly hard to make sure actually you are being convicted by the verses?
I think you just have to be prayerful in your preparation. I'm preparing to preach on John 13 at the moment, and I spent not a vast amount of time, but several hours thinking about it 4 weeks ago when I was down on the farm, thinking about it each morning and just chewing it over. And I think you've got to do that, otherwise you're just churning out platitudes and you've not really meditated on yourself.
And you mentioned that you've also taught John 11 before in evangelistic contexts. How might that differ to what you would be doing on a Sunday morning, for example?
It depends what one is doing. But if you were taking, for example, the delay, you might begin quite strongly on, the suffering that Mary and Martha, as they lose their brother, have gone through. If you're dealing with the death of Lazarus, you might have quite a bit more of building bridges in terms of death and the reality of death before you got into Jesus being angry at death and Jesus being stirred up by death, and then Jesus weeping at death before you come to Jesus. So I think probably when I'm doing it evangelistically, I do a little bit more of the building bridges for people. Just in terms of when you have been doing that and preaching this evangelistically in the past, can you just give us a sense of how it's received? Because they are very, emotionally evocative chapters, aren't they? Well, yeah. I mean, I think you've probably heard me say before, I don't think we need great hooks with the gospel. I think the gospel is kind of generationally contextualized, because wherever you go in the world, people are facing death. Sure. John 11 will always be relevant. Thank you. That's a much better way of putting it than generationally contextualized. What a stupid phrase. But, you just, obviously you've got to speak the right language. Yeah. So there is an element of contextualization there. But in terms of the what we're dealing with in the gospel, we're dealing with God stepping into the world and confronting humanity's greatest problem with his great solution. And we don't need to be trying to find extra special contextual hooks, because if the person in front of you is a human being, they experience these things. We haven't changed in human history from facing death, disease, the devil, this disordered creation. It's all there.
And in a world that increasingly, or at least in Britain, when it's increasingly secular, that does seem to be the question that friends come to me with. there is no answer for death in the world that they can see. And so then they come asking, well, what is it that Jesus can offer that my friends, my job, money really can't?
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful, Molly. And then when you get to be an old dodder like me, you're going to funerals.
So you mentioned earlier that whilst there are some real similarities between chapters 11 and 12 and later chapters 18 to 20 or 21, but you said that you wouldn't try and teach those together. How might you tackle chapters 18 to 20?
Well, I think I would just take it kind of chronologically as it goes. What I'm saying, I think, is that in a normal run of things, I would teach 13 through 17 in between. But when I get to 18, I need to keep bearing in mind that we've had 11 and 12, so that Jesus has risen is indicative that he is the resurrection and the life. It's not simply that I'm not gonna cease to exist at the end of my life. It's that he is the Lord and final judge of all. So that you want to make sure you hold, as it were, the freight of that in your handling of chapter 20. You may not mention it often, but it's there. And when Thomas falls at the feet of Jesus and says, "My Lord and my God," and similarly, when he says, "Peace be with you," or "Go and tell my brother and my sisters, I'm going to my Father and your Father," then you're wanting to bring all the freight of the upper room discourse, where Jesus talks about, "I will not leave you as orphans," and the achievement of the cross into those pieces in chapter 20.
Really helpful. And I guess some of these passages are quite long. I suppose it depends on how quickly you teach through these chapters. But do you have any tips for how to do that, how to bring in that theological weight without either your sermons lasting 2 hours or feeling like they're incredibly dense?
I think I tend to be a very heavily illustrated speaker, and I try and bring texture into the illustration and explanation. And I don't know if I've talked about this on kind of preaching before, but I try and make sure that under each point that I'm making, there is not only explanation and illustration, but that the way of explaining and illustrating varies from point to point. So I think texture in preaching is, by which I mean public monologue preaching, texture is really important. So, for example, you might drill down into one detail in the first point, but then you might take, if it fits the structure, a longer piece and explain it in the second bit by way of explanation. When it comes to illustration, you might use one sort of illustration in the first point, but make sure your illustration in the second point comes from is sort of slightly different genre of illustration.
So your first illustration might be a Francis Bacon quotes, and your second one might be a story or something like that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's exactly right. Well, actually, I mean, when I did pilot, for example, I said, in COVID, I was walking along and bumped into this guy, and he said, and I raced back home, and it turns out that Francis Bacon wasn't the artist after all. And thank goodness I didn't open my mouth and show what an idiot and ignoramus I am. But this is what he said, and quoted a bit from him. But then when it comes to my kingdom isn't, what is truth? Anyone on the side of truth listens to me, then you might illustrate that anecdotally or from a Christian's experience who has, listened to Jesus. Do you see what I mean?
No, that's a really helpful point. And I guess, actually, I've not really thought of it in those terms before, but I can see how preaching could very quickly become dry if the preacher's only illustrations are from the Chronicles of Narnia or something like that.
I think this is a more general point on communication and preaching. When first I did a children's talk, two things. First of all, Mark Ashton up at Stag had said to us, when you're doing children's talks, make sure you don't produce all your big guns at the beginning
Okay.
and then just talk to the adults.
Huh.
And that you see again and again in children's talks. You know, person comes in, great razzmatazz, and then that's it, and the children switch off because it's all happened. So I'm always wanting to save in children's talks. Not that I do many of them, but when I'm training people there, you got to have. But then my wife said you've got to have texture. You can't have the same. And I think the same is for adults. Then I remember having had this discussion with Mark and talked to Janet about it and given a couple of talks like this. And I remember going to a London show, and I can't remember what it was, something or other, you know, saved up for months to go. But anyway, you get to the London show, obviously only the very best come to London.
Yeah.
And you see this thing in front of you, and there is texture, and every part of that spectacle in front of you, if you go to the Lion King or whatever, even if you're sitting in the cheap seats at the back, you can see every single actor is doing their bit to make the whole piece. And there's just extraordinary texture. You'll find the same. You go and visit, you know, I don't know if you're into this, but you went to visit some great horticultural society garden. You'll discover the great gardener. They've got this piece which you stand back and look at it, and then you go up close and you think every little piece is doing its bit. And I think preaching wants to have that element to it, that we've broken off the bits that are going to distract. We don't have bits that are redundant. And that running through it, there are differences. You might have a piece where you say this and not this, this and not that, this and not the other, this and not the other. You know, but you wouldn't do that on every point.
Sure. Yeah.
You might have a piece where you just have 5 illustrations, bang, 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 bang. J.C. Ryle is just extraordinary at that. He will tell you the same thing just like that 5 times to illustrate it. And then another one, you might have a story.
Do you think it's true? And I'm just thinking of Molly's action figure Bible studies and that kind of thing. But if it is just a kind of effective method of teaching, then it's not limited to preaching, I suppose.
I think it's all preaching. So whether it's a small group or whether it's one-to-one, or I think you need to.
Yeah. Well, William, it's been really brilliant having you back on the podcast. Always a pleasure to have you here. We're very excited that you're joining us once again next week for the very last episode on our series in John, where we'll talk more about the mysterious, as so far mysterious, chapters 13-17, which we haven't talked about much, as well as rounding up on the whole gospel. We're really looking forward to that. But William, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
It's great to be with you again. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bible Matters podcast. If you've liked this episode, why not like or subscribe wherever you've been listening, or share it with anyone who might find it helpful. You can leave us a comment or get in touch to let us know what you think, and the details on how to do that are in the show notes. The Bible Matters podcast was produced by myself, Leo Elbourne, as well as with Tiff Carter-Whitley. This is the Bible Matters podcast, encouraging you in faithful Bible teaching and ministry.